Commander Relsa had served 20 years in the Galactic Relief Fleet. And in all those years, she had never met anyone quite like Ethan Hayes. He was a human one of the smallest, softest looking species in the Alliance, but there was something strange about him. Something quiet, something heavy, and something that made people trust him within minutes. Rel SA first saw him standing near the hangar doors of Rescue Ship in 91. His uniform was clean, but the skin beneath his eyes looked darker, as if he hadn't slept well in weeks. His posture was relaxed, but the slight tremble in his fingers told a different story. Most species in the fleet carried themselves with pride or fear or rigid discipline. Ethan carried himself like someone who had already survived too much. The hangar was busy that morning. Technicians shouted commands, drones lifted supply crates, and officers ran back and forth for the next mission briefing. But Ethan didn't rush. He moved slowly, with a calm that almost felt wrong in such chaos. He checked equipment, tightened straps, and spoke softly to a frightened trainee who had just joined the unit. Relsa overheard the conversation. "I have never been inside a collapsed mining tunnel before," the trainee said, voice shaking. "I heard humans panic easily. How do you stay calm?" Ethan smiled, a small, tired, but kind smile. "I just tell myself one step at a time. And when someone asks if I can keep going, I say, just a little more." The trainee blinked, surprised. "That actually helps." "It keeps me moving," Ethan said. "Sometimes moving is enough." Relsa watched him with narrow eyes. Humans were known for their emotional nature, but Ethan's emotions seemed buried under layers of something deeper. Something worn out. Something that made her chest feel tight without knowing why. During the briefing, Captain Droken explained the mission, a minor rescue on the outer colony of Thestra 4. There had been a structural failure in one of the dome habitats. No casualties confirmed. But communication was lost. Most of the crew accepted the mission without worry. Thestra 4 had emergencies almost every month. But Relsa saw Ethan's jaw tighten when the images appeared on the screen. A cracked dome, a collapsed hallway, darkness and dust swallowing the floor. It looked like a place someone else had already lost something in. "Hayes," Captain Droken said, "you will lead the support team." Ethan nodded without hesitation. "Yes, sir." The crew began boarding the drop shuttle. The engines hummed to life. The floor vibrated under their feet. And Rielsa found herself sitting beside the human for the first time. She studied him closely now. His hands were steady, but his breathing was slow and controlled, like he was trying to hide something. "You have been on many tunnel missions?" Relsa asked. "Too many," he answered softly. "Do they frighten you?" He looked down at his gloves. "Every single one." Relsa frowned. "Then why you continued doing them?" He hesitated. For a moment, he didn't look like a soldier. He looked like a man trying not to fall apart, because someone always needs help, he whispered. "And if I can give even a little." "I do." Relsa didn't know why his words struck her so strongly. Maybe because they were honest. Maybe because they held pain. Maybe because she saw, deep in his eyes, a shadow of something he was running from. When the shuttle landed on Thestra 4, alarms echoed across the dome. Smoke drifted through the cracks in the ceiling. The ground shook lightly under their boots. Civilians ran toward the rescue team, desperate and confused. Ethan didn't wait for orders. He rushed forward, kneeling beside an injured worker and checking their pulse with careful hands. His voice stayed soft, calm, reassuring, like he had said the same words 1,000 times before. "You're going to be okay. Just breathe. We'll get you out." Relsa realized then. This human did not act brave because he lacked fear. He acted brave because he felt too much, because something inside him refused to stop moving, because every time the world asked him to give up, he whispered, "Just a little more." And she wondered what had happened in his past that made him push himself this hard. What pain was he hiding behind that tired smile? What was Ethan Hayes really running from? That question burned quietly in her heart, and the answer would change both their lives. The sun on Thestra 4 was dim behind thick clouds of dust, making the atmosphere feel heavy and uncertain. The rescue team moved carefully through the damaged dome, searching for survivors trapped in the lower sectors. Sparks still danced along broken wires, and every few minutes, another weak tremor shook the metal walls. Ethan Hayes walked slightly ahead of the group, his flashlight cutting through the darkness like a thin silver blade. His body was tense but steady. Every sound made him look up, sharply falling rubble, a distant echo, a faint cry. He reacted to each one with the same focused intensity, as if the world depended on it. Commander Relsa followed behind him, watching him with curiosity and concern. Other humans she had worked with were loud, expressive, easy to understand. Ethan was quiet, contained, and filled with emotions that never reached the surface. She could sense them: pain, fear, determination, but she couldn't read them. They reached a collapsed hallway. The floor had sunk into a deep crack, and twisted metal beams blocked most of the path. The team stopped, unsure how to cross. "We can't pass this," one crew member said. "The terrain scanner reads unstable ground." Relsa turned toward Ethan. "We find another route." But Ethan didn't move. He stared at the debris, then crouched low to inspect it. He gently touched the metal, feeling the heat, then pressed his ear against one of the broken panels. Relsa stepped closer. "Ethan, what are you doing?" He raised a finger for silence. Everyone froze. After a long moment, Ethan whispered, "Someone is on the other side." The crew went silent. They looked at each other, confused and frightened. "You're sure?" Relsa asked. "Yes," Ethan answered with no hesitation. "I heard tapping. Faint, but real." The crew engineers rushed forward to scan the area. Their devices confirmed it: weak life signs behind the collapse section. A worker, injured, running out of air. Relsa spoke quickly. "All right, cutting tools ready. Hayes, step back." But Ethan didn't listen. He already had his hands on a metal beam, trying to lift it. His teeth clenched. His muscles trembled. Dust fell over him like gray snow. "Ethan." Relsa grabbed his arm. "This is unstable. If you pull the wrong piece, the whole ceiling could collapse." He looked at her with tired, pleading eyes. "There's not much time. We need a safe method," she insisted. He shook his head. "Safe is too slow." She felt something twist painfully inside her. Why was he like this? Why did he throw himself toward danger as if his life didn't matter? The engineers began cutting the metal with heated blades, but the process was slow. Too slow. Every minute, the workers' vitals weakened. Ethan paced like a caged animal. Relsa finally asked him softly, "Why does this one matter so much to you?" Ethan didn't answer at first. He leaned against the cracked wall, breathing deeply, staring into the darkness. "When I was younger," he murmured, "a storm hit our old mining station on Earth. My sister. She was trapped inside a collapsed tunnel. Rescue crews were supposed to save her. They waited too long. They said the collapse was too unstable, too dangerous." His voice cracked. "She died while they stood outside arguing." Relsa's chest tightened. "I promised myself," Ethan whispered, "if someone was trapped and I could reach them, I wouldn't wait." Before she could speak, a loud cracking noise echoed above them. The engineers shouted for everyone to step back. The structure groaned, threatening to fall. The trapped workers' vitals dropped again. Ethan made his decision, without warning. He dashed forward, sliding through a narrow gap between beams before Relsa could stop him. "Ethan!" She screamed. He ignored her voice as he squeezed deeper into the debris. Dust filled the air. Sharp metal scraped his arms. The space was so tight he had to crawl on his stomach. But he kept going. Because someone needed help. Because he refused to lose another life. Because when the world demanded he stop, he only whispered to himself, "Just a little more." And he pushed forward into the darkness. The deeper Ethan crawled into the collapsed tunnel, the heavier the air became. Dust clung to his skin, coating his sweat in a gray layer that made it almost impossible to breathe. Every few seconds, a sharp creak of metal above made him flinch, and his heart raced as he realized how unstable the structure had become. Yet he did not stop. Every second counted. and every second could mean life or death for the person trapped ahead. Relsa stood at the entrance, flashlight in hand, watching anxiously. She felt helpless. The crew called out to him, telling him to retreat, but their voices sounded distant, swallowed by the thick layers of debris. Even the engineers were frozen, their cutting tools idle as they waited for any movement from the human who refused to obey Dot inside. Ethan finally reached the trapped worker. A young miner, barely older than 15, was pinned under a beam that threatened to crush him completely. The boy's eyes were wide with fear, tears streaking through the dust. He coughed violently, struggling to breathe. Ethan knelt beside him, his hands shaking slightly. But his touch was steady. "It's okay," Ethan said softly, trying to calm both the child and himself. "I'm here." "You're not alone," the miner whimpered, clutching Ethan's arm. "It hurts. It hurts so much." Ethan swallowed hard, his own throat tight. He had learned to hide pain, but seeing it mirrored in another human being cut through every shield he had. "I know," he whispered. "I know it, huh? Hurts, but I'm going to get you out. Just hold on a little longer." Relsa S. voice came faintly through the comms. "Hayes, this is too dangerous. Step back." He shook his head without looking up. "I can't, there's more." That word, more, made Relsa's stomach twist. She didn't understand how he could keep going when every instinct screamed at him to stop. But Ethan had never been like other humans. He didn't measure his courage by fearlessness. He measured it by the lives he could save. Every collapse, every tremor, every second of smoke and dust. He pushed through it. The engineers finally got the cutting tools in place, their lasers slicing slowly through the metal. Ethan used the time to reassure the trapped miner. "You're stronger than you think. You can do this. I'll be right here." The boy's grip on Ethan's arm tightened. "Don't leave me," he cried. "I won't," Ethan promised, though his voice cracked. He had seen loss before. Too much loss. And he would not let it happen again. Minutes felt like hours. The ground shook under their feet as the mining moon trembled, cracks spreading through the tunnel walls. Dust fell like rain, filling the tunnel with a suffocating haze. Relsa watched from above, heart pounding, as Ethan slowly and carefully freed the beam, pinning the boy. Every movement was precise, every breath calculated. Finally, with a grunt of effort, Ethan lifted the beam enough to slide the miner out. The boy collapsed into his arms, coughing but alive. Ethan's own body shivered from exhaustion, and sweat ran into his eyes, stinging painfully. But he did not sit. He pushed forward, peering into the deeper darkness. "There are more," he said, almost to himself. Relsa's heart stopped. "Ethan, no." "We can't." But Ethan was already moving, his legs pumping with energy fueled by determination, not strength. He disappeared deeper into the tunnel, leaving the crew frozen in fear and awe. She realized something terrifying and incredible at the same time. Humans, despite their fragility, could do things no other species could. They could carry hope in the face of impossible danger. They could keep moving, even when everything inside them begged them to stop. Relsa whispered to herself, almost in disbelief. He's not just brave. He's unstoppable. He's human. And as Ethan disappeared into the shadow of the crumbling tunnels, she understood that this one human would either save everyone or break completely trying, and neither option seemed impossible. The deeper Ethan went into the tunnels, the louder the tremors became. Each step sent vibrations through his legs, making him stumble, but he refused to stop. Dust choked the air, thick and heavy, filling his lungs with every breath. Sparks from broken wires lit the walls in sudden, harsh flashes, making the shadows jump and twist. Somewhere, metal groaned under pressure. Somewhere, someone was trapped. And Ethan couldn't leave. Relsa followed as close as she dared, her heart pounding with fear. She had seen soldiers fight, see worlds burn, and face alien armies, but nothing prepared her for this human stubbornness. Humans were known for emotion, for fear, for weakness, but Ethan was something else entirely. He carried his fear like a shield and pressed forward anyway. They reached a fork in the tunnel. One passage led to a collapsed section, where the sensors showed a faint life sign. The other path was clear, but led away from anyone needing help. The crew waited, unsure what to do. Ethan's eyes were fixed on the faint pulse. His hand rested on the wall for support, knuckles white. He looked tired, bones tired, heart tired, soul tired. But his voice, soft but firm, broke the silence. "There are more," he said simply. Rilsa S. chest tightened. "Ethan, it's too dangerous. You've done enough. We need to go back." He shook his head, barely noticeable. "No, not enough. Not yet." The truth slipped from his lips in a whisper, one Relsa almost didn't hear. "My sister. She died in a collapse. I couldn't save her. I promised myself I would never fail anyone else." Her heart caught in her throat. That one sentence explained everything. The obsession, the determination, the refusal to stop. It was not courage. It was pain turned into purpose. Ethan moved forward again. Relsa grabbed his arm, pleading. "Hayes, please. Don't throw yourself into this." He turned to her for just a second. His eyes, raw and tired, looked straight into hers. "I can't. Not this time." The moment stretched thin, like the metal walls around them. Then a loud crack split the air. A support beam above groaned and twisted. Dust fell in heavy sheets. Sparks exploded around them, and the ground beneath their feet shivered violently. Ethan lunged toward the trapped worker before Relsa could stop him. The boy was pinned under a beam, too heavy for one person to lift, and his breathing was shallow, labored. Every second counted. Relsa tried to help, but the beam was solid and unyielding. Ethan's hands shook as he gripped it. His muscles burned. His skin scraped against metal, but he refused to pull away. "You're going to be okay," he whispered to the boy. "I've got you. Just a little more." Relsa S. voice broke. "You can't keep doing this, Ethan. You'll die. I don't care," he said. His voice was strained, barely audible over the crumbling tunnel. "I won't let anyone else die while I stand by." Relsa felt something inside her shatter. All the warnings, all the fear, all the rules of survival, they didn't matter to him. He was beyond fear, beyond pain, beyond reason. The engineers were still working on cutting tools, but Ethan's focus never wavered. Sweat poured down his face, eyes burning from smoke and exhaustion, but he didn't stop. The boy's small hand gripped his arm. Ethan looked down at him and whispered, "I'm here. Just a little more." And in that moment, something broke inside Ethan, not the tunnel, not the beam, but himself. The weight of all he had lost, all he had survived, and all he had promised came crashing down. His shoulders slumped, his hands trembled, and for the first time, the human seemed fragile, real, painfully human. Relsa rushed to him, grabbing him before he fell completely. "It's okay. You're not alone." For a moment, Ethan just let himself collapse against her. The human who never quit, who never stopped, who never allowed fear to touch him, finally allowed himself to be weak. And in that weakness, Relsa saw the courage that no one could teach. Not weapons, not technology, not even training, just the heart of a human refusing to give up. Even when broken, the tunnels around them still threatened to crumble. But for a few quiet seconds, there was only Ethan and the impossible strength of someone who refused to surrender. The tunnels trembled as if the moon itself were groaning in pain. Dust and smoke swirled through the air, making it hard to see, hard to breathe, hard to think. Ethan Hayes pressed forward, crawling over broken beams, ignoring the ache in his arms, the burn in his lungs, and the tremor of exhaustion that had begun to creep into his legs. Every movement was a struggle, but he did not stop. There were lives depending on him, and he had made a promise he could not break. Commander Relsa followed as closely as she dared, shouting warnings and orders, but her words seemed to vanish in the roar of collapsing metal. "Ethan, you have to stop," she screamed. But he kept moving, his eyes fixed on the faint pulse of life ahead. He reached the next section of collapse. where a twisted ceiling beam had trapped a mother and her young child. The mother clutched her child to her chest, her eyes wide with terror. Ethan crouched beside them, his hands shaking but determined. "It's okay," he whispered, brushing the dust from the mother's hair. "I'm here. Okay, yeah, just a little more, okay?" The woman sobbed, tears cutting through the dirt on her face. "Please don't leave us." "I won't," Ethan promised, though every word cost him more energy than the last. He tried lifting the beam with all his strength, but it didn't budge. His fingers slipped on the cold metal. His legs burned and sweat stung his eyes. Relsa stepped closer, grabbing his shoulder. "Ethan, you can't do this alone. Step back now, or you'll die." He shook his head, voice tight with strain. I can't. There's no time. We can't lose them." "Not again." Relsa's heart ached at his words. She had seen fear, but this was something different. This was the weight of guilt, of loss, of a past that refused to let go. She remembered the stories she had heard of humans fragile, emotional, unpredictable, but this human was something else. This human carried courage like a shield, even when his own body begged for rest. The engineers finally joined, their cutting tools sizzling as they tried to slice through the metal beam. Dust and sparks filled the air, and the ground quaked beneath their feet. Ethan gritted his teeth, refusing to move until the mother and child were safe. He whispered again, more to himself than anyone else. "Just a little more. Just a little more." The mother's child whimpered, clinging to Ethan's arm. He held the boy close, feeling the child's tiny heartbeat against his chest. His own heartbeat pounded painfully in his ears. Every muscle screamed in protest, but he ignored it. He had promised himself long ago that he would never give up when someone's life hung in the balance. Finally, with a synchronized effort, the engineers cut the final support. Ethan lifted the beam just enough for the mother to pull her child free. He collapsed on his knees, exhausted, coughing, covered in dust and sweat. The mother hugged her child tightly, tears streaming down her face, and whispered over and over, "Thank you. Thank you." Ethan breathed heavily, trying to regain his strength. He felt every ache in his body, every cut, every burn, but he refused to think about himself. There was still another section of the tunnel, still more trapped, still more lives to save. Relsa knelt beside him, holding his shoulder. "You're human, Ethan. You can't keep doing this alone." He looked up at her, eyes tired but unyielding. I have to. If I stop, someone else might not make it. I promised I would never let it happen again." Relsa felt a mixture of fear and admiration. He was fragile, yet unstoppable. Broken, yet unyielding. And as she watched him rise to his feet, gripping his tools with shaking hands, she realized that the strength of humanity was not in its armor or weapons. It was in the heart that refused to give up, even when everything around it was falling apart. And Ethan Hayes, small, worn, and exhausted, pressed forward into the darkness once more, whispering to himself, "Just a little more." And in those 3 words, the crew saw the impossible truth. A human could carry hope through despair, could hold courage against fear, and could keep moving even when broken, to save another life. The tunnels groaned. Dust fell, sparks flew. But Ethan went on because he refused to stop, because he could not stop doubt, because, as always, he whispered, "Just a little more." Ethan's legs ached with every step. His arms burned, his lungs begged for air, and his vision blurred from exhaustion. The tunnel seemed to close around him, walls twisting, ceilings groaning, and every tremor shaking the ground beneath him like the moon itself was trying to swallow them. But still he moved forward. 1 life, 2 lives, maybe more depended on him. Every time the world whispered stop, he whispered back, "Just a little more." Commander Relsa had never seen anyone fight so hard. She had watched soldiers storm battlefields, medics risk themselves in toxic zones, but Ethan was different. He carried fear and pain like invisible armor, yet he pressed forward, refusing to bend or falter. She could see the toll it was taking. The way his body shook, the way his hands cut on sharp metal, the way his eyes burned with fatigue, but she could also see something stronger. Determination that refused to break Dot as Ethan approached another collapse section. He saw them a group of trapped miners, their faces pale and eyes wide with panic. Dust covered their clothes, cuts streaked their arms, and the younger ones clutched older siblings in fear. Their life signs were weak, barely detectable. But they were alive. Ethan knelt beside the first miner, a middle-aged alien with a fractured arm. "Hold still," he said, voice low and steady. "We're getting you out." The miners clutched him instinctively, their fear meeting his determination. And for a moment, he felt the weight of all the lives he had saved and all the ones he could not. His hands trembled as he lifted debris, muscles screaming in protest. Every second felt like an eternity. Relsa saw the panic rising in the crew as well. They had trained for rescue missions, but never under such extreme conditions. Sparks flew from broken cables, the floor quaked, and the ceiling shifted like it might fall at any moment. The crew's tools were powerful, but even they were limited against the collapsing tunnels. Finally, Relsa understood something important. She could not save Ethan alone. The human strength, raw and unyielding, had pushed him to the edge. He could no longer carry the burden himself, but the crew, 10 species, 10 different ways of thinking, 10 different strengths could work together. "Team," she shouted. "Now. We lift together." The crew surged forward. Arms, claws, tentacles, and strength combined. Sparks flew. Metal groaned. Gusts filled the air. And, slowly, impossibly, the beam trapping the miners began to shift. Ethan, exhausted beyond words, could only barely assist, leaning on the side, letting the crew carry the weight alongside him when the last miner was free. Ethan collapsed against the wall, chest heaving. Relsa knelt beside him, gripping his arm. "You did it," she whispered. "You saved them all." Ethan tried to speak, but his voice came out as a weak rasp. "I just couldn't stop." She smiled through tears, understanding finally dawning. Humans, she realized, were not strong because they were fearless. They were strong because, even when broken, they kept moving forward, because they refused to surrender, because they carried hope for others when hope seemed impossible. "You didn't do it alone this time," she said softly. "Look around. Your strength gave us courage, but our strength helped you too." Ethan's eyes met hers, burning with gratitude and exhaustion. I felt so weak," he admitted, "but I couldn't leave them." Relsa held his shoulder firmly. "And you didn't. That is what makes humans remarkable. You break and yet you rise. You falter and yet you continue. You inspire others to lift the impossible because you dared to start." For the first time in hours, Ethan allowed himself to exhale. Relief swept over him like a warm tide. The tunnels still threatened collapse. The moon still trembled, but the miners were safe. The crew had survived, and Ethan had finally let others share the burden he had carried alone for so long. The human who never quit, who refused to stop, who pushed through exhaustion and fear, had shown everyone something undeniable. That true strength lies not in muscle or armor, but in the heart that refuses to give up, not just for oneself, but for every life that needs saving. And as Ethan looked around at the faces of the crew, tired, dirty, but alive, he realized that sometimes human strength is not just the courage to keep moving. It is the courage to let others move with you. For the first time, he whispered those words not to himself, but to the universe, just a little more. Together, and somehow in the darkness of Thestra 4, amid dust, sparks, and trembling stone, it was enough. The shuttle lifted off from Thestra 4, shaking as the moon's unstable core tore the tunnels apart beneath them. Sparks rained down like fireflies as dust and debris exploded into the atmosphere. The crew held on, hearts pounding, eyes wide, But their cargo, the miners, was safe. Safe because one human refused to quit. Ethan Hayes lay slumped in the corner of the shuttle, his body shaking from exhaustion, his lungs burning, his mind still caught in the tunnel's chaos. His hands were scraped and swollen, his uniform soaked in sweat and dust. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel the weight of everything he had done. The fear he had carried, the pain he had pushed through, and the lives he had saved. Rosa knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. You did it, she said softly. You saved them all. You carried hope through darkness. Ethan's voice was barely audible. Did everyone make it? All of them, she confirmed, tears filling her eyes. Because of you. You refused to stop, even when your body said you should. Because of you, everyone survived. He exhaled shakily, his chest rising and falling, like a storm finally calming. For a long moment, he didn't speak, just stared at the shuttle walls as if the memory of the tunnels were etched into them. Then his voice came, trembling but honest. I didn't think I could keep going. I felt broken, so broken. Relsa smiled gently, gripping his hand. That's human strength, Ethan. Not because you don't break, but because you keep going even when you do. You carry more than your own weight. You carry hope for others. He tried to smile, but it was weak, tired, and raw. I just wanted to make sure no one else would die like my sister. Relsa S. softened. You couldn't save her back then. But look at what you've done now. You've saved countless lives. You've shown something the universe never forgets. Humans rise when others fall. Even broken, they move forward. The shuttle grew quiet as the crew began to their own wounds. Other species spoke in hushed tones, some murmuring about human resilience, others shaking their heads in awe. But Ethan's attention stayed on Relsa. I thought being human meant being weak, he whispered. I thought I would always fail, that my heart would get in the way. Relsa shook her head. Being human is exactly why you succeed. You feel pain, fear, doubt, and yet you act anyway. You inspire strength in others, even when you feel weakest. That is your gift. That is your power. That is humanity. Ethan's eyes glistened with tears, the first honest ones he had allowed himself in months. He swallowed, voice breaking, and said softly, Thank you for not letting me break alone. Relsa squeezed his hand. You never were alone, Ethan. Every life you saved, every hand you reached, every person you refused to leave behind, you carried us with you. And we carried you? For the first time, Ethan let himself rest. Not just physically, but in his heart. He had carried the weight of loss and fear for years, but now he understood something profound. Strength was not measured by how little you faltered. It was measured by how many you lifted along the way, as the shuttle soared through the smoky skies of Thestra 4. Leaving the shattered tunnels behind, the crew of 10 species looked at the human who had changed them forever. Small, fragile in appearance, trembling from exhaustion but unbroken, Ethan finally smiled. Not the tired, polite smile he often wore. Not the quiet, controlled one. A real smile. Gentle, honest, and soft, I guess. Humans aren't so weak after all, he said. No, Relsa replied, smiling back. We just never gave up. And somewhere above the stars and broken moons, the story of the human who refused to quit spread quietly through the fleet. Reminder to every species that the heart of a human is stronger than any armor, braver than any weapon, and unyielding even when it breaks.